In a city where dreams die at dusk, one man's kindness might just reignite a mother's fading hope. Snoop Dogg turns a gas station encounter into a life-changing saga. Snoop Dogg notices a pregnant woman working hard at a gas station, and his act will shock you. Watch how. Like, subscribe, and comment to witness the power of second chances. The evening had settled over the city of Riverdale, painting the skyline with hues of deep blue and amber. The streets were quieter now, as most of the city's inhabitants had retreated to their homes. A cool breeze carried the faint scent of gasoline and asphalt, weaving its way through the dimly lit parking lot of a small gas station on the outskirts of town. Bright neon lights flickered above the pumps, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement below. Snoop Dogg pulled his sleek, low-riding black Cadillac into the lot, the bass from his car's sound system still thumping softly. His day had been long, filled with studio sessions and live performances, and all he wanted now was to get home. But as he rolled to a stop by one of the pumps, his attention was drawn to a figure moving between the cars. It was a woman, small and visibly pregnant, wearing a worn, oversized uniform with the station's logo faded on the chest. Her movements were slow, deliberate, yet there was a quiet determination in the way she carried herself. Snoop stepped out of his car, his distinctive style immediately catching the attention of a few nearby customers, but he paid no mind to the stolen glances. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the woman as she approached a nearby sedan, holding a squeegee and a bucket of soapy water. Her gaze shifted briefly to the ground. Her face was kind, but etched with lines of exhaustion. It wasn't her appearance that caught Snoop's attention. It was the two children nearby. A boy, no older than 6, was crouched on the ground, drawing on the concrete with a piece of yellow chalk. Next to him, a little girl, perhaps 3 or 4, was curled up on an old plastic chair wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket, her head resting on a makeshift pillow, an empty backpack. The sight stirred something in Snoop, a pang of concern mixed with curiosity. He watched as the woman approached the sedan, offering to clean the windshield for tips. The driver waved her off impatiently, and she moved back toward the gas station, her shoulders drooping slightly but not defeated. Snoop moved toward the pump, casually observing her as he filled his tank. When their eyes met briefly, she offered a polite smile, the kind of smile that seemed practiced, a shield against the questions she probably received daily. "Yo, excuse me," Snoop called out, his voice carrying across the lot. The woman paused, turning toward him. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, stepping closer, her hand still gripping the squeegee. "You work here?" he asked, though it was clear from her uniform that she did. "Yes," she replied with a small nod. "I do the night shift." Snoop glanced at the children. "And those are your kids?" Her eyes followed his gaze, and for a moment her expression softened, revealing a more vulnerable side. "Yes, sir. I don't have anyone to watch them, so I bring them with me." Snoop's brows furrowed, and he tilted his head slightly. "That's a lot to handle." "What about their dad?" The question hung in the air for a moment before she answered. "He left," she said simply, her voice steady but low. "When he found out I was pregnant again, he decided he wasn't ready for more responsibility. It's just us now." Snoop nodded slowly, his gaze flicking between her and the children. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elise," she replied. "And these are Liam and Ava." Snoop crouched down to Liam's level, his presence immediately captivating the boy. "What are you drawing there, big man?" he asked, his voice warm. Liam held up his chalk drawing proudly, a colorful but messy picture of what looked like a house. "It's where we're going to live one day," he said brightly. "A big house with lots of rooms." Snoop felt his chest tighten at the boy's innocent hope. He stood up and turned back to Elise, who was watching nervously. "Elise, why don't you have a seat for a minute?" Snoop suggested, gesturing to a nearby bench. "I'm fine, really," she said quickly. "I don't want to waste your time." "You're not wasting anything," Snoop said firmly. "Come on." Reluctantly, Elise followed him to the bench, glancing over her shoulder at her children to ensure they were safe. Once seated, Snoop leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You work nights to take care of your kids," he began. You're about to have another one, and you're doing all this alone. That's not easy. Elise shrugged slightly, her hands resting protectively on her belly. It's not easy, she admitted. But what choice do I have? They depend on me. Snoop nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. Do you get any help? Family? Friends? She shook her head. My mom's in another state and she's sick. I don't want to burden her and friends. She trailed off, her meaning clear. Snoop leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He had met countless people in his life, but something about Elise and her quiet strength struck a chord with him. Elise, he said after a moment, his voice steady. I can't just drive away tonight and forget about this. I want to help you. Help me! Why? She looked at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. Because I can, Snoop said simply, and because you deserve it. You're out here working hard, doing everything you can for your kids. That takes guts. Elise's lips parted slightly as though she wanted to protest, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had begun to lift. Let me do something for you, Snoop continued. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk more. You don't have to do this alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Thank you, she whispered. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Snoop replied with a kind smile. Just take care of those kids and yourself. I'll see you tomorrow. As he walked back to his Cadillac, Elise watched him go, her mind racing. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of optimism. The next evening, Snoop Dogg returned to the gas station, his Cadillac pulling into the same spot as before. The lot looked almost identical to the night before, but this time Snoop wasn't here just to fill his tank. He stepped out of the car carrying a large bag filled with groceries and a couple of toys for the kids. Elise was at the far end of the station assisting a customer with their windshield. Her movements the same, steady and deliberate, but Snoop could see the weight on her shoulders from a mile away. As he approached, Liam noticed him first, his face lighting up in recognition. Mom! Liam called out, running toward Snoop. It's the cool guy from last night. Elise turned quickly, her eyes widening in surprise. Snoop? She asked, her voice a mix of confusion and relief. She wiped her hands on her uniform and walked over, glancing at the bag in his hand. What are you doing back here? I told you I'd come back, Snoop said with a warm smile, crouching to greet Liam before standing again. I brought some things for you and the kids. Thought you might need them. Elise hesitated, her eyes flicking between Snoop and the bag. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I can manage. Elise, Snoop said gently, managing isn't living. Let me help you. She bit her lip, clearly conflicted, but eventually nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Snoop handed her the bag and motioned toward the bench they had sat on the night before. Let's talk for a bit, he said, if you've got the time. She glanced at the station where a coworker had just arrived to start their shift, and then at her children who were now playing with the toys Snoop had brought. I've got a few minutes, she said, sitting down. Snoop joined her, his laid-back style making the bench seem less ordinary. I want to know more about you, he said. How you got here? Elise sighed, her hands resting on her lap. It's not much of a story, she began. Just life, I guess. Tell me anyway, Snoop encouraged. I've got time. Elise hesitated, then took a deep breath. I grew up in a small town, she said. My mom raised me on her own. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, and I always admired her for that. But I swore I wouldn't end up in the same position. I wanted to do more, be more. She paused, her gaze distant. I wanted to be a chef. I loved cooking. My grandma used to teach me when I was little, and it became my escape. I even saved up to take a few classes after high school. Snoop nodded, listening intently. What happened? Elise's expression grew somber. Life happened, she said. I met my husband, got pregnant with Liam, and had to put my dreams on hold. It wasn't so bad at first. We were happy. But then Ava came along and things got harder. My husband started pulling away, saying he couldn't handle the stress. And when I told him I was pregnant again, he left. Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Since then, it's just been me and the kids. I do what I can. The gas station job isn't much, but it pays the bills barely. I bring the kids here because I don't have anyone else to watch them. It's not ideal, but we get by. Snoop's jaw tightened as he absorbed her words. Her story wasn't unique. It was one he had heard before in different forms, from countless people struggling to make ends meet. But hearing it directly from Elise, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes and the determination in her voice, made it hit differently. "You've been through a lot," Snoop said after a moment, "but you're still standing." "That says a lot about you," Elise managed a small smile. "What choice do I have?" she asked. "My kids depend on me. They're my whole world." Snoop glanced at Liam and Ava, who were now playing a game of tag near the gas station's edge, their laughter echoing in the cool night air, a stark contrast to the weight of their mother's story. "What about your dreams?" Snoop asked. "Do you still want to be a chef?" Elise hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels too far away, like something that belongs to another life. Right now, I'm just trying to survive." Snoop leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Elise, dreams don't have to stay dreams. You've got what it takes. I can see that. You just need a little help." She looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "Because I can," Snoop said simply, "and because you deserve it." "Your kids deserve it." Elise blinked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Snoop replied. "Just trust me. I've got a few ideas to make things easier for you." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the gas station filling the air. Elise finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know why, but thank you." Snoop smiled. "It's just the beginning, Elise. We're going to get you back on your feet." As he stood to leave, Elise watched him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had no idea what he had in mind, but for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, a spark of optimism. Snoop walked back to his Cadillac, his mind already racing with plans. He knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix, but he was determined to do whatever it took. Elise and her kids deserved more than just survival. They deserved a chance to thrive, and Snoop was going to make sure they got it. The next week unfolded like a whirlwind for Elise. True to his word, Snoop wasted no time putting his plans into action. Elise's initial disbelief gave way to cautious hope as she saw the changes begin to take shape. It all started with a phone call 2 days after their conversation at the gas station. Elise received a call from a kind but professional-sounding woman named Rachel, who introduced herself as part of Snoop's foundation. Elise hesitated at first, unsure of what this meant, but Rachel quickly put her at ease. "Snoop told us about your situation," Rachel explained. "We're here to help. The first step is getting you some immediate relief, food, bills, and medical support. Then we'll look at the long term. But first, how does tomorrow sound for a visit?" Elise was stunned. "A visit to where?" "To your apartment," Rachel replied. "We'll bring some groceries and take care of the overdue rent. After that, we can talk about next steps." Elise agreed, her voice shaky with gratitude. That night, she looked at her kids who were sleeping peacefully on the couch, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to imagine a better future. The next day, 2 volunteers arrived at Elise's apartment carrying bags of groceries, diapers, and toys for the kids. They also brought a letter confirming that her rent for the next 6 months had been paid in advance. Elise stood in her doorway, speechless, as Liam and Ava excitedly explored the bags of food and gifts. One of the volunteers, a middle-aged man with a warm smile, said, "This is just the start, Elise. You're not alone anymore." Over the following days, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Snoop had not only ensured Elise's immediate needs were met, but also set the stage for her long-term stability. He arranged for her to take part in a culinary training program at a local community center in Riverdale, which specialized in helping single parents gain new skills. The program offered free childcare during classes, which meant Liam and Ava would be looked after while Elise pursued her passion. When Elise arrived at the community center for her first class, she was greeted by a small group of other parents who were also learning to cook professionally. She hesitated at the entrance, her nerves getting the better of her, but the instructor, a cheerful woman named Sophia, welcomed her warmly. "You're going to love it here," Sophia said, handing Elise an apron. "We're all about second chances and making dreams come true." For the first time in years, Elise felt like she belonged somewhere. She dove into the classes with enthusiasm, her natural talent quickly shining through. Cooking wasn't just a skill for her, it was a joy, a form of expression. Sophia often praised Elise's creativity and skill, telling her she had what it took to go far. Meanwhile, Snoop continued to check in on Elise and her kids. He visited their apartment every few days, bringing small surprises, new books for Liam, a stuffed animal for Ava, and even a set of chef's knives for Elise. Each visit strengthened their bond, and Elise began to see Snoop not just as a benefactor, but as a genuine friend. One evening, Snoop stopped by the community center to see Elise in action. He stood in the back of the kitchen, watching as she prepared a dish with precision and care. The look of focus on her face and the pride in her movements made him smile. After class, Elise approached him, wiping her hands on her apron. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice teasing but warm. "Just checking on my star student," Snoop replied. "Sophia says you're a natural." Elise blushed, shaking her head. "I still have a lot to learn." "You're doing great," Snoop said. "And I've got something to show you." He led her outside to his Cadillac and opened the trunk. Inside was a large sign with bold letters that read, "Elise's Culinary Haven. Coming soon." Elise stared at the sign, her hands flying to her mouth. "Snoop, what is this?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's your future," Snoop said. "There's a small space downtown in Riverdale that just opened up. We're going to turn it into your very own cafe." Elise was overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say. How can I ever repay you?" "You don't have to," Snoop said simply. "Just promise me one thing. When you're in a position to help someone else, you'll do it." Elise nodded, her voice breaking. "I promise." The weeks that followed were some of the busiest and most fulfilling of Elise's life. With Snoop's support, she worked alongside contractors to design her cafe. The space was small but charming, with a cozy dining area and an open kitchen where customers could watch her cook. She named the cafe Elise's Culinary Haven in honor of her journey and the people who had helped her along the way. On opening day, the cafe was packed. Friends, family, and strangers alike came to support Elise and taste her food. Liam and Ava ran around the dining room helping deliver menus and napkins, their laughter filling the space. Elise worked tirelessly in the kitchen, her face glowing with pride and joy. Snoop sat at a corner table watching the scene unfold. When Elise finally had a moment to sit down, she joined him, a plate of her signature dish in hand. "Two new beginnings," Snoop said, raising his glass of water. "Two dreams coming true," Elise replied, her smile radiant. As the evening wound down, Elise looked around her cafe, taking in the warmth and laughter that filled the room. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for her and her family.